disasters only prolong it or makes it even worse. So human rights are primarily endangered and violated in cases of disaster. Now, when it comes to the state, what happens is that the state has a triple duty, right, to respect, protect, and fulfill the human rights of persons. So whenever we are talking about respect, it is obligation of the state not to actively violate the right. Protect means to take protective measures. And when we are talking about fulfilling the rights, we are talking about certain services and goods. Now, I just want you people to understand that when we are talking about these things, pandemic that is there, and see that these are certain things we're expecting the state to do in this regard. And also the state has a responsibility not to discriminate on the various reasons for religion, ethnic origin, gender, etc. Now, this is what that right-based approaches of support mechanism that exist in this one. So we are the right holder, and the state is the duty bearer. So what happens is that when we have names from the state, and that is our empowerment process, the state also is under a responsibility to fulfill. And it's in the charges of the state, or we have a inherent right as a victim. So and now any disaster happens, it is not that an humanitarian act, but these humanitarian actions must be based on human rights. Like, for example, you can't just say, for example, there is a need of food, and just you cannot give a food. Say, for example, there is a Brahmin population. Now, suddenly you cannot probably provide a non-veg food to them because that may not be acceptable to them. Or, for example, there could be various types of people, like there could be children, there could be women, there could be people with certain disabilities that are there. There could be people from diseases that one. So that is what these human rights based approach means, is that there cannot be one solution for everybody. We have to take into consideration the needs and the requirements of people that are there. So we are talking about a human rights based approach to human rights action, and to systematically analyze the vulnerability and identify specific needs. That's what I was just referring to, and it should be non-discriminatory in manner. So, to ensure that a humanitarian action is adequate, we have to see that it is available, it is accessible, it is acceptable, and it is adaptable. So these are some of the basic things that we must understand that when we are responding to a disaster. Now, what happens is that, like, if response is not adequate, then what is that could be a secondary disaster. Hello. Yeah. Hello.
You are audible. Could you please proceed?
Yeah. Am I audible?
Yes, sir. Now you're audible.
Okay. The slides visible?
Yes, sir. It's flawed disaster response and HR violations.
Okay. So, okay. So, okay. Can you see a change of the slide?
Yes, sir.
Fair enough. So,
Your voice is not audible again.
entitled for the protection of human rights. Now, what happens is that in the process of inadequate or inappropriate disaster, so there could be a second disaster. One of the examples, a perfect example could be in 2010, the Haiti earthquake. What happens is that in this earthquake, this was one of the most devastating earthquake that happened in the recent time, and around 30 lakh.
So your voice is breaking.
That's where affected with the now is what happened because on that is
Your voice is breaking.
already voice is breaking.
Yes, sir.
Just give me a moment. Just give. Yeah. Am I visible and audible now?
So you are not visible, but you're audible. The PowerPoint presentation is visible.
Yes, sir, you are audible.
Just. Okay. I think. Yeah. So, is this PowerPoint visible or is it not visible?
Not visible, sir.
Just.
Yes, sir.
Now
It's
is it
yes,
visible?
yes, sir. It's visible.
Okay. Okay. As I was mentioning about this one, that this 2005 Act brought this new set of authorities which are which are there from national to the district level, right? It is just an addition to the whatever system that we already have of the normal governmental setup, because you have to also understand while these authorities have been there, the manpower is not with these authorities. So the manpower is with this government at the union, state, or the district administration. So it's a linkage between these new authorities and the old authorities, and that's how the new disaster management framework that is there. Now you can see that many of the orders have been given by the National Disaster Management Authority, but eventually to implement those orders, they don't have the workforce. So they have to rely on the on the government personnel for this one. Now we have to also understand that what exactly disaster that what is disaster in this what life suffering or damage property, and they are also talking about environmental degradation which may arise because of natural or man-made causes and by accident, negligence, and beyond the coping capacity of the affected community. Now if we talk about this one, then we can see that the COVID-19 which is there, it is a disaster according to this particular definition, right? So that's what it has been declared as a disaster under this act. Now, so for the lockdown order is concerned, now if we look at the act per se, there is no as such provision for declaration of disasters. So what has happened is that the lockdown order has been given under this under section 6(2)(I), which is kind of a residuary power which has been given to NDMA to declare a disaster. Now, this is what you will see in this particular law, that they have given this lockdown order. In first, there was an order issued by NDMA, and followed by that one, there was an order that the guidelines, which was the National Executive Committee, which issued guidelines under Section 10, which was issued by the Home Secretary in the capacity of the chairperson NEC, to all the guidelines and the directions that you see nowadays that time to time they are giving, it is under this particular section. Now there is also said that there are certain legal action that under this act, and it says that if you are not obeying this order, they can take action. Also one more section which has often come to the forefront is section 188 of the IPC. It is the disobedience to follow orders by public servant. This is how these orders are being implemented. Now if we look at this act per se, this act is just a bureaucratic setup that is there. As such, the victims' rights are not very much considered under this act, except one or two provision, particularly section 12, which talks about minimum standard of relief in relation to shelter, food, drinking water, medical cover, and sanitation. There are special provisions for women and orphans to be made, and they talked about ex gratia assistance. Now, why I'm talking about this one is that once the pandemic has happened, this is something which we are all dwelling about. That what kind of food, shelter, other things that we are giving. And also there is section 61 of this act which says that there would not be any discrimination on the basis of sex, caste, community, descent, religion in providing relief. Right? So, but what is missing in this particular act is that there is no community participation as such. Of course, there are provisions of capacity building, though it has not been specified anywhere except in the disaster management definition itself. But there are some cases, say for example, with regard to community awareness and other things. But otherwise, the community participation, that the opportunity of consulting and participating in planning and these things, they are not various stages of disaster response. It is not there. And you can see even in this pandemic also, when this particular act has been enforced. So this has now become the principal act in dealing with this pandemic, but you don't see the community participation much of that there. It is mostly a state-driven act activities that which we see, and that is the reason that you will find that in many of the cases that the fault line that is there in this response is because the community is never being consulted. So everything is done from the state, and then they realize that there are some mistakes, and then they go back and do the rectification. Right. So this is what I wanted to tell you about the Disaster Management Act. The other thing which also has come in the forefront, the other act, which is the Epidemic Diseases Act. Now, we have to understand that in the context in which this Epidemic Diseases Act was enacted. This was enacted in 1897, and because it was enacted to deal with the bubonic plague which swept through the Bombay Presidency, and the act was there to give certain power in the hands of the government to deal with, to take special measures and formulate regulation to be observed by people to contain the spread of this disease. Now, this is something which we have to understand that in those days this particular act empowered the government extraordinarily, and there was also penalties for violation of this regulation under section 88, which is also now being implemented. Now, it also says that the state may empower any person to take some measures, right, in this context. So it is all about empowerment. The needs of the patient means there was no concept of patients' rights, that there could be different needs of patients. These were not at all being considered. Now, what happens is that if you look at the powers of the government, they could search for suspected plague cases, forcible segregation of affected people, disinfections, evacuation, demolition of affected infected places. All public gathering was banned, right? There were also cases of humiliation, including public stripping and violence against women, all those things. And there was a lot of people actually protested against this particular at that point of time. Now, even the historians also said that some historians that it is one of the most draconian pieces of sanitary legislation ever adopted in the colonial India. Now, you have to understand that when we are dealing with this one in 2020, we are talking about two particular acts. One is this Epidemic Diseases Act, and another is the Disaster Management Act. So I'm just trying to give you the kind of an overview that these two acts. And you must have also known that very recently there were ordinances which were there was ordinance which were brought in, and this particular ordinance were brought in because there were certain reported incidents of attacking the doctors and health workers. So what happens is that this previously what happens is that was the punishment was very less. It was a cognizable it was non-cognizable offense, and maximum was 6 months, 1,000 rupees fine. Now what they have done is that they have allowed up to 7 years of imprisonment if there are any attack on doctors and health workers. My intention is that it's a knee-jerk reaction that has happened. This is again the kind of modifications that we are seeing is not from a health perspective, but again from a state with a lot of means it is empowering the state with lots of power to take actions against any of these people. That there could be some issues like that there could be some stray attacks, other things, but the main focus is somewhere else. The main focus is that are we dealing with this situation with a right act? Of course, at this moment, we don't have an option because we can't now draft a new law. But once this pandemic is over, we have to see that these ordinances are all fine, but is this law good enough to deal with such situations? Now, whenever we are talking about health, we are also talking about other associated rights. It's not about the right to health alone. Right? We are talking about right to food, right to housing, right to work, right to education, human dignity, privacy, prohibition against torture. These are all associated rights which are there in this whole concept of right to health. And if you see all the actions or inactions of the state has certain bearing on those rights. So first, let us pick up some of them. Like for example, let's say the access to information. Now, India did impart information regarding the nature of the disease, the precautions to be made, the level of threat it imposed, but sadly it came quite late. Right, we were when we were trying to do with these things, we were already in late March, and you have to understand that the first time these things were broke out was sometime in December. Right, we waited for so long time to actually react. Some countries did react earlier. We will come to some of these examples. But what happened was that there was no information on possible measures to be taken by the authorities, early warning of possible consequences, ongoing response efforts, because all these things were missing. So to take an informed decision on these things, we did not have enough information. I tell you an anecdote in my case, a person who is dealing with health law and all those disaster laws. My own father went back to West Bengal in sometime in mid-March, and he got stuck till today. Even I also could not understand that how important is this one, because there were no specific guidelines for us. I mean, some amount of travel restrictions were there for people coming in and out. And remember, even in March also, there were people who were flying in and out of this country. Right, and then what happened was that towards the end of this March, on 23rd of March, there was a 4-hour notice, and then they said that we have a complete lockdown of this country. Right, the question is that was that 4-hour good enough? Now, curiously, what happens was that all these things were when going on. I looked at the NDMA, the National Disaster Management Authority website, and I found an advisory of February 4, 2020. And you can see that some of those things, some of the challenges that we are having now was there in that advisory. Like, for example, that you will find out that they in that February 4 advisory, they have talked about joint meeting for situational awareness. They were talking about advisories on travel, hygiene, avoiding crowd contact, quarantine of tanning people, right? They were talking about the corona warriors, so-called corona warriors, that people were on the forefront. They were talking about isolation facilities, even spreading of fake news, fake these things, the rumors that we are talking about. This is I have just taken out from an advisory in February 4th, 2020. Imagine that the Trump visit was there, everything was going on. I'm only trying to say is that had we had these things been propagated through various TV channels, the phones, the everything that is happening now, had it started in February, maybe our response would have been better. Second, it comes is that we are talking about right to life, but we are not talking about right to life as a mere animal existence, but right to live with dignity. This has been told by the Supreme Court also, right? We have found sometimes it is true that people were just casually violated the lockdown orders and they're on the streets, but there were also many instances of people, particularly poor people, being beat up mercilessly, they humiliated, even the spraying of disinfectants, right, on returnees, right? It was really absurd. It was cruel, I would rather say. In fact, one scroll news I was looking at, and I liked this heading, that the Indian police must understand that coronavirus cannot be beaten with a lathi. Right, so there were people were punished. People were made to do sit-ups in the public. They were shamed. Their names were published on the social media because they were out in the streets. Right. And the only thing is that we have seen a lot of mob violence in India, and that even in Maharashtra that the sad incidents happen. In that context, you are publishing the names of these people in the social media. It poses a real threat. These are some of the pictures, right, which had become a face of such violence, right? Very sad pictures, of course. Right? And then we come to right to food, which was also an issue in this one. See, one of the things that that the people were not were restricted in some places; they were not allowed to go home. But one of the things that it was said was that they will be provided food. But whenever we are talking about food, providing of the food, that either the food was of poor quality or they were insufficient quantity. Then the people had a real problem because they might be people from a different state, and they are in a say, for example, a person from West Bengal, they are in Haryana. They wanted to get food, but the food from the government outlets were not given because their ration cards were not the local ration cards. I'm not talking about some private things which were going on, the private initiatives, the NGOs or individual people who were doing this one. So this is something which created another problem in during this lockdown. Of course, now what has happened is that, in fact, for example, state like Maharashtra has said that if you have a ration card from any of the country, any of the state, you will be given food. Now they are also talking about a one nation, one ration card kind of arrangements that irrespective means there will be a portability of ration cards, which eventually we have to think about once this pandemic get over, right? Then of course comes, so once these are the food related issues that you have seen that there are families were complaining about the quality of the food that have been there. Very little food were available, not enough for the families to take into for the families to survive, right? So that was one of the rights which really was affected during this pandemic. Then come the right to livelihood or right to work. I think all law students know about this cases. This is one of the few cases we learned in the early part of law study, particularly constitutional law, that Olga Tellis, where they said that the right to life and means right to livelihood is a part of right to life. So no person can live without means of living, right? So and there were certain, and this was also one of the primary issue in this lockdown situations. Also, there was MHA guidelines to the employers not to deduct salaries or not to terminate them, but there is one problem in this one, that can we make one person suffer for another person, right? Because the employers are also, say for example, I have a shop, I have no sales. Now you are telling me to take care of the my employees. Is that possible, right? Or it became there that we are talking about morality rather than legality of those things. And if you look at the Disaster Management Act, the directions which that can be given from the national authorities, they are meant for the state authorities. They are not for private individuals. And as and you can see that even in the context of this pandemic, you have seen a large amount of reduction in salaries, unemployment. There were layoffs in various places, and we will talk about our Delhi High Court decision, which they said that no, you can't compel the MSMEs to give full salaries in such a situation. Yes, some cases it may be possible, but not in all the places. Now, other thing which is also became very crucial in this lockdown situation was the right to privacy. Now, what happened was that once you have you are they find out that you are a positive patient for coronavirus. So what they were doing was that they were marking your house, right? Even the election commission allowed the use of the indelible ink to stamp people for home quarantine, right? Even the Maharashtra government has also done this. In UP they did this one. There was one particular case. What happened was that there was names and details, including phone numbers, everything, right? A confidential list which was curated by the government of 722 passengers who came to Delhi. That was forwarded on WhatsApp and Facebook group. Facebook. Now, after this privacy was breached, then the government agencies were started passing on the blame from one agency to another agency, that it was not our fault, it was somebody else's fault. But this actually happened, right? So what happened was that this created a situation of ostracizing people, that heightening their risk of being abused. So this created a really serious situation so far the privacy rights are concerned, right? You will see that you can see this picture that how houses were marked for the COVID-19 patients, right, who were in home quarantine. Or for example, there were people who were made to say that I'm the enemy of the society because I did not stay home. So these are things that actually happen. In many of the cases, these are seriously issues of privacy that we have to understand. Now, so far this marking of the houses is concerned, I would tell you that it is not that what would people do, but only you mark that house and just leave it. Probably it is not the correct approach. There were people. I can give you an example from Taiwan, right, where they not only home quarantine people, they called people up periodically to actually ask them that how they are, how are they doing. All those things were happening, right? Then another controversy that came up is the Arabia Setu. Right, it happened to be one of the most downloaded app. Now 9 crore plus downloads happen. It is more than TikTok, the popular app. But you have to also understand that out of 130 odd people, 30 crore people, that 9 crore is a small number, but still it was a most downloaded app. It was kind of a corona tracker, but where you have to feed information, you can manipulate that information, right? And then what happened was that the data was claimed to be encrypted and will be not shared with third parties, but with the location tracking and the feature of sending reports directly to the government, there was always this situation of a threat of mass surveillance which was there. And in fact, there were certain I have come across interviews of people associated with this RPS thing, and they acknowledge that yes, there are still some glitches that we have to work on. The information that was being provided was not accurate, and then there were certain issues, particularly this one thing happened, that there was an ethical hacker from France who exposed the glitches, and the government actually responded, and they claim that everything is safe, but they even after that one, they were found that there was issues with this particular app. So what happened was that if you see that the government has also come down soft on this particular app, once they made it mandatory for the staff and in the private and the public offices, and one who wants to travel. But you can, if you see that lockdown 4, they said that it is not mandatory for resuming offices. Just take care of other things, that social distancing, those things need to be there. So you can understand that through all those things, there were issues regarding right to privacy, freedom of movement, right to life and liberty. Those things are there. Now, we all know that there is no comprehensive data protection laws in India. But what happens is that although there is no data protection laws, and still we went ahead with such an app. And on the app itself, the government has said that there is limited liability, and it said that it would not be liable if their third party access this information. So this is another thing which we have to take into account. Now, I want to take note of an act which is now repealed. It is 1898, the Lepers Act. Why I'm talking about this one is that we talked about segregation and kind of marking them, using ink, all those things. These were done in this Lepers Act. So there was a compulsory segregation of people creating asylums 10 kilometers away from main cities. They were given no property rights, marriage rights. That it's a ground of divorce. Under the personal laws, many states prohibit leprosy patients from running local election, no driving license, train travel. These were there in Motor Vehicles Act. If you see of 1939, they were given no driving license. So some of the things that I'm trying to understand is that, are we on a time machine? Are we going back to certain practices which has been done away with? Right, and this Lepers Act was repealed. One of the things was that we found out that these are acts which kind of they can be leprosy is curable, and then with medicines and other things that we can deal with this one, and then they thought that we must do away with this Lepers Act, right? So we have to keep in mind, because we are talking about privacy, we are talking about things that about marking people, and we have to think about these acts which are all gone out of the statute book. Another important thing is that right to shelter. Now, this MHA gave an order not to evict tenants due to non-payment of rents, and there are many states which said that to defer the rent collection, not to take rent collection, or for 1 to 3 months. Right? The Delhi government said that they will pay for this one. UP government, as usual, went ahead and said that they issued a magisterial order with punishment clauses also. Now the question is that is it fair to force the landlords to forego or defer rent? Because many of the landlords are also, that is their way of income. Now, all the law students, they know that nowadays this force majeure clause that has come into so much of discussion, right? And for non-law students, just I have written this one, that it is all about unforeseeable circumstances that prevent somebody from fulfilling a contract. So the problem is that most of the tenancy agreements do not have such provision, right? And in under section 56 of the Contract Act, that there is doctrine of frustration, because it is kind of impossibility of performance contract. So what happens is that if we go by legal terms, that these are generally not applicable in lease agreements, right? This kind of lease agreement. And moreover, it is not also about the commercial places. It is just for residential places. It's very difficult that how the courts will interpret those things. Can we really enforce this kind of things? And if they go to the court, will the court give relief in this regard? Other things which got affected is that right to movement and residence, right? So we know that under Article 19 of the Indian Constitution, there are freedom of movement, right, to move freely in the country and reside and settle in any part of the India. But there are also, at the same point of time, there are also reasonable restrictions that are there in general, in the interest of general public under 19 clause 5 of the Constitution. Now, it has been already said by the courts in various cases that these restrictions must be in an objective manner, right? There must be a clear reason for that. And also they have said that merely because it was implemented harshly cannot be said that it is unreasonable, right? So this is why I'm talking about this one, is that because there were many instances of people being harassed and being beaten up, and unfair restrictions were there. So these are kind of things that we have to understand, that even though it's a pandemic situation, can we do and remember this one, the Constitution very specifically said not restrictions, reasonable restriction. So we are talking about doctrine of proportionality, right? That proportionality with the objective that we want to achieve, that must be taken into consideration. The MHA guidelines, which actually have given this kind of restriction, could be open question in the court of law. These images that you can probably see here, right? That people were made to hop in this on the road because these migrants were trying to go back home. And the most dreadful incident that happened is on this train accident in Aurangabad, right? That so many people died. But the point is that some people will say that no, who told them to sleep on the railway lines? You think that they would have a choice of a better? They would have slept on these railway lines? No, maybe they don't have. They were no. Why were they even walking through this railway lines? There were no ways to go back home. There were no ways. There were no buses, no trains. There were lots of problems that happened, that they have to go for certain kinds of tests. All those things that were there, right? The most unfortunate thing, see, whenever these are some of the rights that I spoke about. Of course, there could be more and more rights that we can discuss about, but I thought that we will stop somewhere. So these are some of the rights that I discussed. In this context, let me tell you about that. Whenever we are talking about right, a right without a remedy is no right. But one of the saddest part in this whole pandemic is the role of the Supreme Court. The role means this is probably, as a law student, right, we are probably seeing some dark days of the Supreme Court. And all people, particularly constitutional law people and all those students, can be happy that I don't see any good judgments, any jurisprudence that is going to be developed by the Supreme Court. So no more case laws, new case laws to even study, right? They almost junked all PILs regarding COVID-19. They have accepted all the time the government status reports, right? There was a PIL, and I have given just 2 or 3 PILs that the Supreme Court junked, right? And what kind of PILs have they said? The Supreme Court, there was a PIL, they said that they don't have enough. They should be given at least some wages transferred to their bank account in the shelter homes. Then the CJI said that if they are provided meals, then why do they need money? They never questioned the status reports of the government, right? And there was a Hindu survey which said that 96% of the migrants did not get ration and 90% did not receive wage during the lockdown. When people were walking with no food, no money, right? There were applications for urgent directions to all district magistrates to identify them and to ensure them that they reach their nearby places free of cost, dignified manner. The Supreme Court, 3-judge bench of the Supreme Court said it is not possible for the court to monitor who is working and who is not working. And remember these things. These I am talking about, these are exact words of the Supreme Court, right? The most unfortunate thing, this 3 days prior to this Aurangabad incident, there was PIL before this one key, please don't put any conditions, let these people travel. The Supreme Court said that no, they junked that PIL also, and they said as all necessary steps are being taken by the center and the states, we do not see any purpose in keeping this writ petition pending, and they disposed it off. Right? This is the nature of the Supreme Court in this kind of pandemic. In fact, what has happened is that the high courts, 12 to 13 high courts have given orders on food and shelter. They talked about the working migrants. For example, the Madras High Court said it's a human tragedy. One cannot control his tears, and this because what they are seeing in the media. The Gujarat High Court said that it is not the COVID. They are dying of starvation. The Karnataka High Court talked about information about special trains, right? All those things came from the High Courts. The most important is the Andhra Pradesh High Court direction. The court said that there are hundreds of migrants laborers with their children and baggage walking on the national highways. If at this stage this court does not react and pass order, this court would be failing in its role as a protector and elevator of the suffering. Definitely the high courts have superseded they have become higher courts than the Supreme Court. In fact, in this particular high court direction, there were in this order, there were various directions given on food, drinking water, dehydration salt, glucose packets, right, about sanitary napkins. They said that the pamphlets need to be printed in Hindi and Telugu with emergency phone numbers. Look at the kind of judicial activism and that the high courts have seen, where the Supreme Courts have not, right? So to end this one, right, I said what we should have done. First thing is that we have to plan in advance. I will give you have you seen Taiwan, close to China, have few hundred victims? Japan, few hundred. They started long back. And remember, in Taiwan, there was no as such lockdown. See, there has been reports already coming down. Lockdown is not a solution to this problem, right? In interacting with the people, right? Taking testing, right? Ensuring that they have their basic needs feel like these are certain things. Lockdown can only defer the what is going to happen, and you are saying that the Niti Aayog was giving that it will flatten, the curve will flatten, it is rising. More importance is on mitigation, right? But having said so, I must also say that the government in our, none of the government in our, except one or two things like, for example, government of Kerala or in Orissa, particularly government of Kerala, most of the government has not been ready for such a situation, irrespective of which kind of parties they are being governed by, right? So this is something which we have to understand, that we are talking about the Epidemic Act to be replaced. We need to, and Epidemic Diseases Act is more of a reactionary act. We need an act with prevention and control. Right? We have this National Health Mission, which also have that surveillance thing, and the private sector has to be included. Just 2 days back, another good judgment has come from the Telangana High Court. What they have said is that the government said said that under the Epidemic Diseases Act, it is the state government who can do everything. In this case, what happens is that there was a PIL and said if the citizens want to get themselves tested at any private laboratory or an hospital approved by ICMR on payment basis, it should be allowed. And the state government was opposing this one, but the High Court said that no, we must do this one, and this is not, nowhere in the Epidemics Act it is said that this is not possible. And other thing is that they look at the purpose of the act and all those things. Very nice interpretation they have given, and they said this is very much allowed under Article 21 also. Right? And they also tried to say, they were trying to say that this is an emergency situation. The court has said that no emergency has been declared. This one, as a law student, you must have to, we may say that, oh, it's an emergency situation, but no emergency has been declared. Right? So it is said that no, we cannot say it's a medical emergency. A new term cannot be there. So this Telangana High Court decision is important. They have said that you can get yourself tested there, and if they said yes, that it's all fine. Means we'll accept that one. Just to give an example, that Stafford Act of US, which is the main disaster management act in the US. Of course, US is the worst performing country in the world at this moment. But having said so, I'm just trying to say that it's because they have a wonderful president at this moment, right? So that's also a lot of things. A lot of credit goes to him of this situation there, right? In the Stafford Act, there are a lot of victims assistance program. Right? We don't have this kind of things there. That means that in some of the cases, the state is mandated to give those assistance. Right? So that kind of arrangement is there in Stafford. Accountability of the disaster management authorities. See, the criminal provisions of officials in cases of negligence, food discipline. There are a number of countries. You talk about Russia, you talk about the Europe, means other countries in Colombia. There are cases which said that people can be criminally made liable for negligence, forced displacement. We have we always say it's a disaster situation, it's an emergency situation, so everything is waived off. In fact, in the Disaster Management Act itself, there is very high degree of immunity has been granted to disaster management officials. Right? You can't prosecute, means take any action against them below the Supreme Court and the High Court. Right? We have to consider this one. Right? In a book I have written very recently, and I have tried to advocate this one, is that we have to consider disaster victims as right holders. These pandemic victims are right holders. They are not recipients of state largesse. That state out of gratitude जो भी दे रहा है वो ले रहा है. They have their rights. That right to be safe from disaster, right to speedy and effective remedies. They also have a right. We have to recognize this one. Our jurisprudence has to develop in this condition. Otherwise, trust me, tomorrow there is another disaster of similar kind or even a small kind, same situations you will see. Exactly the same. We will not live. Another thing is that right to return to the place of habitual residence. Can't we have a right like that? That as a part of Article 19 that we are moving freely, we also have a right to return. right? This is an important thing, right? We must recognize. I don't expect this thing to come from the Supreme Court. Maybe some high courts, if they can say that they have a right to return. So thank you. That is my presentation all about, and I'm glad to take the questions that will come. Some of them, right? And I could see a lot of people already there.
Sir, the
Yeah.
session was indeed very informative. There are a couple of questions that the students and various participants have raised. The first is by
Okay.
Shushmita Gupta. She is saying,
Okay.
so what about the rights of migrants during the pandemic? And the connected question is raised by Shrishti Rajput. She is emphasizing on the constitution and
One
asking,
thing, Himanshu, I am not able to follow. The first question that you said.
is just that a brief elaboration of migrants, rights of migrants during the pandemic.
Okay, just to tell about that one. See, there is an UN guiding principles on internally displaced people, right? Unfortunately, this particular one has not been very much brought into prominence. But this one, they talked about this right of the IDPs, not only in terms of war or conflict, but also in terms of disasters also. And this is a disaster situation, so they have talked about many of the rights that I have discussed in my presentation are there. Now this is not a binding instrument, but many of the countries that I mentioned about, they have drawn inspiration to frame their own laws on this context.
The next question is by Shrishti Rajput. She's mainly concerned with Article 21 of the Constitution and has several trailing questions. So her question is, first is, again, you partially answered that question, that what about emergency, since medical emergency is not a term, and she raises three sets of rights. One is right to have a decent burial under Article 21. The second right to decent burial under Article 21.
Oh yeah, this is an interesting thing. I will come just yeah, remind me about this one. This is something I must inform people here. Yeah. Then
next is Arogya Setu app and the whole violation of privacy by consequently violating Article 21.
right.
And then the third is a very interesting trailing that she places is, why don't we have access? I mean, there are many people who do not have access to internet. How can the government assume that education should be imparted online and the students should be available to give probably online exams? So, what about that?
Okay. Okay, so first thing that I tell you that yes, that that a right to die with dignity means after that my death, that whatever burial, cremation, whatever it is there, I must have a right for this one. This has in West Bengal, I'll tell you what is going on in this one. The bodies are being smuggled from one district to another district, one place within the district to another district, even without the consent of the family members. They are just doing this one because they want to keep the body count low, and they are not even allowing the family members to even meet the dead person, not because of, see, one is that yes, that is a kind of security issues. That means the transmission and other things may be there, that threat is there, but other thing is that they are not even informing the people in to the family members. And second thing is that in the death certificate they are not even mentioning that this person have died of COVID-19. And there was a district in West Bengal, Murshidabad, the medical college, I think he is the vice principal. Accidentally, he informed, he revealed this one, that there is like the government order is there not to do this one. He has done that one. So he has been transferred to another place. Right. So, we are talking about the burial or cremation or whatever it is a very important right. And some of the states, like I can tell you about state of West Bengal, who are even manipulating the dead bodies. Even the famed Calcutta Medical College, the dead bodies are being smuggled out at night, and nobody is telling that what exactly, where are they going, what are they going to do about this. So this is one thing. I think that's a part. Yes, it's an important fundamental right and part of Article 21. Second thing, I think, what was the second question about? Oh, Arogya Setu, right?
Arogya Setu. Yes.
Yeah, Arogya Setu. See, Arogya Setu, this is a problem in our country, is that whether it is Aadhaar or whether it is Arogya Setu, there are security glitches in those kinds of things, and we are not. See, even I would say, see, there is something called that. For example, in Europe, what they are doing is that they are using this anonymized data. So there, the data protection law is way more, way better than what we have in India. In India, we don't have. There is a bill which is pending, and if you look at the bill particularly, you will find that in that bill there is particularly provision which says in case of health emergencies, the in the government can actually access your data, right? So very little privacy would remain in this one. And other thing is that there is a reason, and now the government is saying that we have realized that we cannot force people to download this app and do all those things. They are trying to say that no, we have to counsel people, and we have to go slow. We have to encourage people, tell them about all those things, and rather than forcing them to do this one. And that's why I said that there is a little bit of dilution in the government direction in the current scenario in 4. Or last kya bolna tha, education, right? Education
Yes,
is
sir.
going to be a challenge. Yes, it is a challenge in the sense that there are very recently, I think yesterday or day before yesterday, I was even listening to one OP Jindal Global Law School's webinar with many of the vice chancellor of law universities, right? And I could understand they don't have the way out. They are not able to think about this one, right? And they are all discussing at a very preliminary level, right? We were all talking about MOOCs courses, other things. We are not even thinking how will we evaluate student, the AI-based evaluation process. These things they were not even talking about. And there was a particular question which was posed in that webinar also, that when 8% of the homes have decent net connectivity, how can we provide this one? See, we have to engage into technology. One is that not we have enough penetration of internet, but the speed is horrible. So one is that we have to improve the speed, and second thing is that now it is time to come up with even technologies where these technologies can work at, let's say, in 2G speed also. And that, as a law student, I can't probably answer this one, but there are researches that I know are going on, that how to make things use at a very, very low speed, like 2G speed. So that would probably solve some of the problems. Yeah.
Okay. So next question is by Jaswant Sriram. He asks about, does right to health trump right to privacy? So which right should be given weightage? Because he says that in lockdown 1.0, when the less cases reported, the restrictions were severe. But once we come down to the fourth phase of lockdown, the
I'm not
restrictions
able to
became
hear
comparatively relaxed.
Himanshu. Himanshu, I'm not able to get you.
Okay. I'll just go really slow. I think there's a connection error. So does right to health trump right to privacy?
क्या बोल रहे हो?
Does right to health trump
हाँ,
right to privacy?
right to health.
Trump's right to privacy.
Right to health. What happens? Right to health.
Trump's right to privacy and which should be given upper hand. Right to privacy or right to health.
I'm not able to listen, Himanshu.
Just give me a minute, sir.
Yeah. If this can there be another question? Yeah. Can Himanshu, I'm not able to listen at all. Himanshu, if you can just send me a text, I think I will be
Yes.
able to. Okay. Can right to health trump right to privacy? See, am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So I got the question right. So it is between right to health and right to privacy. See, I think we can only take away privacy by a law, right? And that law must be, with this privacy judgment, you say that you cannot indiscriminately or arbitrarily take this one. Now, in the process, in the name of health, for example, that I told you that no, marking people doing this one, I think that is a little over the board, right? Or some things that we have to understand that. See, one of the thing is that even if we mark people, we have to assure them that look, this is nothing that ostracizing you. It is not like making you, let's say for example, tomorrow I have an COVID, I should not feel like that that I have committed a crime. And that there has been few suicides that has happened because of people getting affected by COVID. So that means what has happened is that somewhere, somewhere, you are making me feel guilty about this one, that I have COVID. So I'm kind of done something wrong. That kind of situation should not be there, right? I was giving you this Taiwan example, right? So you must go and check some of these things that that they bumped up their like mask production for a considerable period of considerable amount. Like they were probably producing some like 2 million masks or 5 million masks. They were producing 17 million masks a month, right? So that kind of things they were engaging with people who are affected with COVID, right? They were trying to say is that look, we are there with you, do you require some help? So these are certain things that we are trying to say that look, you have got this disease, we are with you and we will give you all kinds of support that is there. That kind of things are required. Instead, that's what I'm saying, that you are out, I will beat you up and I'll do this one. I'll give you an example that about privacy, and it is my own example. That is I have to take my mother is on dialysis. I have to take my mother thrice a week to the hospital, and I was doing it all through, right? So I applied for a pass. This pass was not granted to me, saying that I applied it on 11th of April and I wanted it till 30th of April. Because if this goes on for next 6 months, I will require it for next 6 months. Right? What they said was that you see that how non-application of mine on the people who are giving this one. They say that it is rejected because the period asked is very long. Now, how do I understand what is the right? So one is that you have to understand that if a person is on dialysis, that person required dialysis till the last breath. So there is no short period, long period. Second is that if you feel that, oh, I can give you for 2 weeks or 3 weeks, you give it for 1 week. Then I will again ask for a renewal pass. Instead of that, they said this one. So I don't know that, no, I'm not sure that whether they are being given these kinds of viewpoints, that how do you look at the health of people. Right to health and right to privacy, there would be certain times that they would conflict, but you have to also understand that unless there is a severe risk that your right to health is paramount, right? If there is a severe risk of things, then of course you can think that no, oh, privacy does not matter, we can overcome. All law students must know about that very famous case of X versus Hospital Z, right, about AIDS thing. So that kind of threat you can always. Otherwise, that's what I'm trying to say is that in the legal context, if you have to take away somebody's privacy, there must be very, very pressing need to do this one. Otherwise, you cannot just arbitrarily do it. You cannot just, just some magistrate has given some order or something, some local SHO thinks that you should be beaten up back in home. You can't do that one. I don't think that is. Okay. Another thing is that lockdown orders were severe and lockdown 4 is restriction relaxed. Yes, restrictions are kind of relaxed because we have also understand that we have to live with this one. We can't keep the same standard for all the time. It is something we have to change our probably habits, certain things. Just for example, I was looking at a documentary in Japan. Like, for example, they have this, culture of social distancing, not unnecessarily hugging and shaking people's hand and all. Even they give some people, they give it through a plate or something. That's culture they have to develop. We have to develop a culture. And I tell you about one thing which started a long back after the Modi government came to power, right to sanitation, right, about this Swachh Bharat. It is actually very, very relevant today, right? We really have to be committed to that Swachh Bharat thing, not just for ads, not just ki jharu leke kabhi selfie khich liya, photo khich liya, not that one. This Swachh Bharat is going to be important. Then there is another why PPEs are subject to GST. Does it violate Article 12? There are a lot of issues, because there could be same things that why GST is there, because PPE require certain materials, उस material के ऊपर GST लगते हैं. So it's a difficult question actually. Maybe timing it may be relaxed, but I don't think it will. Same, I think that sanitary pads, the same debate which came up is the same thing here. That GST क्यों चाहिए, ये सब ये है. Views on PPE and face mask still taxed at pandemic. Maybe this kind of relaxation could be there. I'm just giving you an example that the same thing would be there, right? And then can mandatory vaccination violate Article 21? Yeah, this is a very good question, right? Because that in US such things happen in the early part of 20th century, right? There are people, for example, Jehovah's Witnesses and all. There are certain religious belief which is there, and they said, "Oh, we don't want these kinds of vaccination, blood transfusion." So some kinds of these things, mandatory vaccination could be an issue with 21. And the best example was that the polio vaccination. Right, polio vaccination was not a mandatory vaccination. Do you understand? Lot of awareness program has gone in. You have to make people aware that, look, this is something which is good for you. These are something which is help you to do. Then only there is that. Otherwise, if you, again, I tell you, you beat up people, take them to some place, vaccinate them properly, that's not the way that you should be doing it. That's not the way of doing things. Right? Okay. Any more questions?
Yes, sir. No, that'll be all for today, and we will like to conclude today's session.
Just 1 minute. There is one question from my friend Sunod who has asked me a question that a question of stranded Indians abroad. Is there a right to return? That's exactly I was trying to say is that can we make it a part of our 19 clause 19 about right to move freely, right, that it is also a right to return is a kind of a fundamental right. Exactly I was trying to advocate this one, that you can the court actually come up with some this kind of decision that they incorporate. As of now, I don't think that there is an legal right of that sort. Whatever the state is doing it out of courtesy, out of its obligation towards people. But I'm trying to say is that, and it is an enforceable right. I think we require a judicial interpretation in this regard. That's what I mentioned at the last slide of mine. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, sir. So I think that'll be all for today.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes,
So
sir.
thank you for. I could see a lot of participation for this one, and
Yes, sir. I
maybe
would
there
like
was
to
little.
say a vote of thanks for today.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yes, sir. So all the good things come to an end, and so as this webinar. Around 400 people have joined us today, and it's been a great conversation since then. We are grateful to be a part of such wonderful conversations, like in this dreadful situation of pandemic, and it was a wonderful conversation with you. So on behalf of the National Service Team, the North Tap University Student Chapter, I take this opportunity to propose the vote of thanks to those who have directly and indirectly contributed to this webinar. At the outset, I thank our Chief Speaker and resource person, Dr. Sarkar. We are really enlightened with your knowledge and presence, and we appreciate you taking out time for us and sharing your valuable words. And we are thankful to our faculty coordinators, Mr. Himanshu Rathi and Dr. Shilpa Sindhu, for their efforts in making this webinar successful. And we express our keen gratitude towards the North Cap University for giving us this wonderful opportunity. A special thanks to the organizing team as well. Arpil Sharma as the Senior Advisory, Pranav Goyal, Vice President, Priyanshi Sharda, General Secretary, Soumya Sharma, a main team member, and all the core members of the NSS NCO chapter. The core team members for their unflinching support and coordination. Our heartfelt thanks to all the participants for active participation. With these warm words and a kind message, we move to the end of today's webinar. Thank you so much. This is Pooja Batra, President, National Service Team, the North Cap University. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
state also is under a responsibility to